Welcome to BL Perspectives. This is a fresh series brought to you by the folks over at BoxLunch. In each episode, a rotating panel of pop culture insiders, experts, and participants will discuss topical social issues as they relate to pop culture and explore how they intersect with real life. I'm your host, Albert Lawrence, and if you visit a mall near you or browse BoxLunch.com, you will find the flyest collection of pop culture merch for all of your favorite fandoms, which is awesome. But how does that sync with this series? Well, BoxLunch was founded with the roots of civic responsibility and has always given back to the communities it serves. For every $10 spent in-store and on its site, a meal is donated to a person in need via Feeding America. Proceeds from brick and mortar stores are donated to their local food bank, closing the circle on giving. And the company's philosophy of get some, give back drives every single second of this series. So we hope this series empowers us all to consider the content we absorb through a critical lens and encourages us to have meaningful conversations that spark exchanges of diverse ideas. Welcome. In this first episode of our four-part series on race and pop culture, we're exploring how entertainment content influences our perceptions of others and how it informs personal bias, whether we know it or not. So let's bring our episode 1 panelists in. Everybody, welcome Ajel Wade. Ajel is known in the toy industry as the toy coach. She loves helping people outside of the toy industry find their way in, and her online program, Toy Creators Academy, clarifies the toy development and launch process with step-by-step guidance. Welcome, Ajel.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Also, let's welcome Nancy Wang YUEN. Nancy is a sociologist and pop culture expert. She's the author of Real Inequality, Hollywood Actors and Racism, and co-author of Tokens on the Small Screen, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in Primetime and Streaming Television. Welcome, Nancy.
Hi.
And now let's welcome Jamie Broadnax. Jamie is the founder and CEO of the online publication Black Girl Nerds, a website focused on television, film, entertainment news, and lifestyle topics presenting the intersection of geek culture and Black feminism. Welcome, Jamie.
Hi, happy to be here.
Now look, we've all assembled here for one key purpose, so let's get to it. Why are we even talking about race and pop culture to begin with?
I mean, kids aren't really born thinking there's anything wrong with them or the color of their skin. And unfortunately, pop culture is playing a really huge role in making them believe that they're less than their white counterparts. And that's why we need to talk about this.
And people, when they don't know someone, like if I didn't know any Asians, I draw my conclusions and ideas about those groups from popular culture. And that's really dangerous.
Yeah, that's a very powerful, but like you said, also an unfortunate reality that we've got to contend with. So Jamie, where do you weigh in on why race and pop culture are even two elements that are combined right now?
I mean, it's not hyperbolic to say that pop culture, shapes who we are and shapes how we think. So it's important to talk about race because race and representation matters, and how we see ourselves reflected in the movies we watch, the books we read, the fandoms that we love is really important.
Yes, and you mentioned pop culture across the spectrum, right? So we're not just talking about pop culture in film, pop culture in television, pop culture in what we read, but also with what we listen to. So wow, we are just these ciphers that are continuing to take in so much. We're sponging it in. And sometimes we can't necessarily detect how dangerous and what kind of impact that what we are taking in is actually going to have with us. So I'd love to ask Nancy to kind of double back now, and we're going to open up with, why do concepts presented to us in pop culture resonate the way that they do?
So pop culture is a way for people to connect with other fans and for young children to actually develop their identities, right? We think about all the things that we grew up as kids and we identify with, oh my gosh, I love this show, or I listen to this artist, and that becomes synonymous. We dress like them. They're role models, right, for us, pop culture icons. And so they're very formative for young people, but even for adults. It's a way for us to, again, connect with other people and learn more about ourselves. And so it isn't just mere entertainment, but it psychologically forms us.
I also think that I think that pop culture gives you license to try things. So when you see like for example, like when Rihanna dyed her hair bright red, dyed her hair. When she got a bright red weave, up until that point, I was always, and I used to wear weaves all the time, I was always under the impression of like, oh, my weave should look natural so that I can blend in and I could look normal and be accepted. And like seeing somebody in pop culture that is owning something different, that's somebody that you can identify with, that makes you feel like you have the license to do it too, and you can explore and discover new things about yourself and new ways to represent what you feel inside.
I remember personally for myself when I first created the site Black Girl Nerds and using the term blurred, which is the portmanteau term for Black nerd. And at that time, this was back in 2012, that was actually kind of a divisive term. There were a lot of people, a lot of Black nerds in the community that were like, I don't want to be called a blurred. Like, I'm a nerd just like everybody else. But over time, I love how our community has adopted that term and really made it into their own, and even seeing it transform into pop culture, because I read Aisha Tyler's book, Self-Inflicted Wounds, and she mentions the term blurred. And that was just like, you know, an eye-opening to see that, you know, this is a community, and it's a subcultural community of Black folks that are waving their geek flag high, and they're embracing their eccentricities, and they're self-identifying as geeks and nerds, and, you know, they're wearing that moniker proudly. So that's a very important thing.
And I think that also brings up a truth that we've seen within multiple terms, multiple elements of culture, that over time, just like our language is dynamic, also so is the perception that we have of ourselves, as well as how other people see us. There's a continuous change and a morphing. And I do believe that sometimes some people can get a little bit frustrated, right? Because they feel like, well, what's the right thing that I'm supposed to be doing? I thought you wanted to be called this, you wanted to be shown, right? Well, we're showing you. So what's the problem now? And tell me if this resonates with you, but sometimes I feel like, well, yes, but things happen in steps. So yes, the first step was, yes, we wanted representation on screen, but now it's like, but can we also have diverse representation? Is that too much now to also, you know, we can grow in steps. So from each of you, I want to know, is that something that resonates with you? How do you feel about maybe what your expectations, or do you even think, you know, in general culture's expectations were for representation now versus this next level that we're all kind of trying to push behind?
So for Asian Americans, I think that like Crazy Rich Asians was fantastic, but people were like, well, we're not all crazy rich, you know, and is that a new stereotype that's going to come out? And certainly it was an East Asian. I mean, Asian American is a very diverse group with lots of different nationalities, languages, ethnicities. And so Crazy Rich Asians was mostly East Asian, Chinese specific. And so, like, you know, where are South Asians? Where are Southeast Asians? And where are, you know, like underrepresented groups that we haven't seen yet? So yeah, so it's steps, right? We're excited that something like Crazy Rich Asians and Avatar: The Last Airbender, you know, on in terms of cartoons, that there's more representation. But now people are like, okay, enough with the honor and martial arts, or no, our martial arts is great. It's like when you only have one type of representation, that's when people start to get sick of it, or are fearful that that's going to become the new stereotype.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's the same thing with movies like Us, movies like Get Out. Like, everybody's so excited to see Black people have these major roles. And it's, what's really nice is it's not just movies about Black people, where, you know, it's like in a movie featuring a Black family or a main Black character, but it's not about them being Black. And that's what's awesome that's happening right now. But it's just starting, you know, like it's just starting with a movie like Us. And as much as, like, there's this new TV show called Woke. I loved it. Some people hated it, but it really focuses on the fact that he's like Black and he's getting woke, and I love it. But at the same time, you're like, can't there just be a TV show that's like Friends, but the main character is Black? Like, why can't there? Why does it have to be so focused on the color of her skin? So
I just love that we're now seeing films and TV shows that aren't just focused on, you know, race. And race is obviously very important, and we definitely need to shed a light on some of the issues that happen in specific races. But it's nice to just be able to go and see a movie, and especially these genre movies, like you mentioned, Get Out and Us. And even, you know, Nancy talking about the Asian American community, like watching Parasite and the fact that that won Best Picture, like that was amazing to me. Like I was rooting for that the whole time because that film really was a game changer. And I think that it's really important that these kind of films continue to be made, because it goes to show you don't have to put certain races into these boxes to have mass worldwide appeal, that everybody can relate to it.
I know that there's been like a stereotype that Americans don't want to read. We don't want to have to read as we're watching our movies. And so for Parasite to break through in such a major way, I remember going to see it twice just to catch things that I may have missed the first go around. And that sort of experience, I think, you know, Jamie, you kind of mentioned this, it speaks to a broader universality where it's not only this specific group of people that have these specific problems. There's something that's amplified that we all can really tie into. And I think that's a beautiful thing, because in a way, it's helping to defy stereotypes. So Nancy, you mentioned the stereotype that all Asians are focused on the like bringing honor and the martial arts. So tell me, like, why do you think that that's a potentially dangerous thing? Why do you think that certain stereotypes, even if some people may view them as positive things, might still be dangerous in the long run?
Yeah, I think that, you know, if I'm not good at martial arts, which I'm not, I actually tried and I suck at it. Like if I don't fit into, if Asian Americans don't fit into those Asian stereotypes, then we feel like we're not seen, or we're not Asian enough, or, you know, we're just put into a box, which is not cool, right? That's why Parasite, or I'm wearing a Studio Ghibli shirt, that looking to Asia, I think that's one way that Asian Americans have been able to see more representations, because over there, Asians are the majority. And so they can have every representation under the sun, right? Whereas here, we're stuck in these kind of the nerd, the you know, the martial artist, for women, the geisha, all these kind of really problematic, exotic, and also not through our own lens. It doesn't necessarily represent our own experiences, but the lens that the Western lens has put us through.
I hope that we're all just becoming more informed. The fact that we have access to so much more media now, right now, like we're running out of excuses, y'all. We're running out of excuses to not be better. But for each of you, I know that we all have come into pop culture in different ways. So starting with the Gel, can you tell me, how did you first become aware of stereotypes through pop culture?
You know, it's really funny. I actually think I became aware because I didn't meet the expectations that people had of Black people. So I would say it was in high school when people would find out the neighborhood I was from. Like I grew up in Long Island and I grew up in Roosevelt, and the Black people would come up to me and they'd be like, oh, where are you from? Like, what bus are you getting on? Like, let's go, let's like hang out. And I was like, oh, I'm going to Roosevelt. And they would look at me and they'd be like, no, you're not.
Oh no.
And they did not believe it. They were like, you are not from Roosevelt. You can't talk like that and be coming from Roosevelt. Like, no way. And I remember I guess I was sheltered. Like, I guess my parents kept me inside a lot. It wasn't the safest town. But I remember thinking, like, where did they get this idea from? So then I like had to do research because I wasn't fitting in. I was at a private school and there were like 10% Black people and I wasn't fitting in. So I was like researching and like finding like hip hop songs and things. And I was like, oh, so like this is what I'm supposed to be doing. Like I was like, this is what I'm supposed to be listening to. So then I would like I remember going on LimeWire and just like downloading like dozens of hip hop songs. And then I would like go and watch the videos and I'd be like, okay, like I need to memorize this music. Like I was like, this is the only way I'm gonna fit in. I remember, so I don't think at the time I probably realized that it was pop culture influencing what other people thought, and then that was having this like ripple effect and influencing how I was living my life. But I mean, I'm glad it opened my eyes to hip hop. I am, but it definitely only happened out of pressure because people expected me to be one way.
I definitely empathize with that. And even in the nerd community, there's like weird stereotypes there because, people think, because my website is fandom based, that, well, you should be talking about academia and tech more. But I feel like nerd is a very elusive term, and that means different things to different people. And you can identify with it in a myriad of ways. So that's even being stereotyped. But at the same time, it's like, as we're, growing and developing and learning more and building wisdom, we're starting to see that these stereotypes are harmful to people, and we're trying to make those changes. And I'm glad to see that, more people are, being more open with these conversations, and they are, obviously identifying with themselves in ways where they're like, I don't care what people think. If I like to, listen to this kind of music, or, if I like to read these kind of books, or if I'm an Anglophile or whatever, and I just like stuff from the BBC or whatever, then that's fine with me. And I think now with social media, people are able to create these online communities where they can, connect with folks that share these same interests, and that's really cool.
Jamie, when you talk about the expectation that's been projected upon all of us, regardless of what our skin color is, I'm reminded of growing up and having people talk about, like, oh, if you say this, if you listen to this, if you watch this, we're going to take away your black card.
Right, yes.
And so,
I never got one, but yeah.
Right.
I didn't get a black card.
So Nancy, I'm curious for you, and of course, like, you're not the spokesperson for every single person in the race, but like, did you ever encounter that kind of discussion about, like, somebody's card being taken away because they, did not buy into certain stereotypes?
It's complicated, right? So when I was growing up, I think that as an immigrant, and I think Asian Americans are still perceived as an immigrant population, we're trying to assimilate, right, into mainstream culture. And if you think about like post World War II, where the Japanese Americans were interned for not being quote unquote American, even if they were American citizens, there was a national drive, for survival to become more quote unquote American, which is more into mainstream white culture. And so I think that when I first came, I'm an immigrant. I came when I was 5 years old, and immediately they put you in ESL. They want you to speak English. There was no like bilingual education really. There was just learn English. And so there was this kind of, I think, a desire to lose the accent and to speak with, proper English, and to kind of look down on people who maybe sounded or acted more FOB, fa, that's the word that we grew up with using. And so, but of course, as we grow up, we start to come into our identity more as Asian American and embracing more of our Asianness, whether it's food, culture, language. A lot of us still maintain the language just because maybe we have immigrant parents, but there are people who have been here several generations who, don't speak the language. So it's really complicated in terms of then loving Asian culture and embracing that, but also understanding that's not Asian American culture, right? So Parasite, It's a great win. We all felt like we kind of won just because it's an Asian face, but at the same time, that doesn't equate to, oh yay, Asian American representation, and our experience is not exactly the same because we're minorities here in the United States, whereas Parasite, those Koreans, they're in the majority, right? And they're talking about class difference, and there are class differences here, but in the United States, we're kind of obsessed with race and ethnicity. So yeah, all that. Sorry, there's not like a singular answer for Asian American identity, and I can't, like you said, I can't speak for all Asian Americans, but I think for a lot of immigrant cultures, this is the experience of assimilation.
There are certain words that I think that people use within the culture. So, we use when it's like just us, right? But when you share with the world, people get a little uncomfortable. So like, oh, are we allowed to say that? Are we allowed to hear that? Especially with the music all the time. We don't even have to go there, but we know what we're talking about. And so when pop culture comes around and takes a term and just like totally blows it up, it's fascinating. So I think of Fresh Off the Boat, right? I think of Fresh Off the Boat and how like when that show came out, I kind of was curious about like, is this going to cause waves like just based on the title alone? Are people cool with this? And in a way, I don't know if maybe it took the term and like by calling yourselves something sometimes, do you zap the power away from others that may try to use a term in an offensive way. So I'd love to know, like, Nancy, what you think about that. But then also, Jamie, since you're over here portmanteauing, with Blurred and whatnot, did you also feel like there was some sort of power that came with ascribing that term to yourself?
When Fresh Off the Boat came out, I remember a lot of non-Asian friends asking me, can I laugh at this? Am I allowed to enjoy this show? Is this offensive or not offensive? Like somehow I'm the expert on Fresh Off the on FOBs, right? But I also had Asian American friends. So I had a Japanese American friend who's been here, many generations. He was offended by the show because he's like, oh, they're speaking in accents again. And how many times are we going to have this immigrant story? Because it doesn't speak to my story, right? Whereas those of us, I was born in Taiwan, so I really related to Fresh Off the Boat. They actually had an episode where they went to Taiwan. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I did relate to the show a lot because I'm an immigrant myself. And so I think I don't know, Fresh Off the Boat is definitely an insider term. I don't know if it was ever offensive, but I think that I think other people were like, oh, okay, we don't know what that is. And so definitely having it as the title of a sitcom, I think just brings it into popular culture so we can actually talk about it.
And Jamie, with Blurred, I think that when you mentioned just like with marrying black and nerd, and sometimes people within race or within certain cultures, like we don't want to see ourselves as other. I think that really kind of gets into also what Nancy was mentioning in terms of assimilation, where sometimes you don't want to be called out for that, like for the color of your skin. But it seems as though for you, Jamie, there is an additional pride that comes with being both a nerd and black.
Yeah, because you're owning two identities. You're owning obviously your blackness, and then you have your geek card held high. I mean, the fandom community, when you think of Comic-Con, when it first started, it was mostly white males. And as Black people and people of color and women were trying to assimilate in those spaces, a lot of them didn't really feel wanted. A lot of them didn't feel included. And even sometimes a lot of these white males were gatekeepers. And if you didn't know the entire history of the X-Men, well, you're not a nerd. You're not one of us, right? So I think that having these subcultural communities like, Blurred's are important because it's a very open and inclusive space. But it also allows people that maybe have been sort of, kind of wading in the waters, kind of trying to flirt with, geek culture, and they're not quite sure, to be like, well, there's a whole bunch of Black folks that are into this fandom. They're into sci-fi and they're into comic books, they're into gaming. So, it's just kind of a way to, again, be able to be a part of a community, form communities, build a rapport, have those kind of relationships. And that's really important because there's been this history of people just being otherized and feeling like outliers because they didn't see themselves reflected in these hobbies or fandoms that they love.
In the pursuit of inclusion, I think that sometimes it can get tricky and people can adopt the term colorblindness, which from the outside, like it sounds, oh, so very, we're in this thing together. I don't see you for the color of your skin. I don't see. But we all know that that is also not necessarily the way to progress, right? And the way to continue to celebrate and to make people feel included. Because the term colorblindness really does ignore the fact that discrimination exists, if we're just being like straight up blunt. So I want to talk about discrimination for a moment, and I want to talk about bias. So let's first discuss the two types of bias that exist. We've got explicit bias and implicit bias. Can someone from this crew kind of step on up sort of and break down for us, what is explicit bias? What is implicit bias? How do they differ?
I think that explicit bias is what we think of when we think of racism. Although now I think we're starting to have a more nuanced idea. But I think when people stereotypically think racism is someone who's obviously racist, who's intentionally racist, who has intentional bias, where they have clear feelings and attitudes that translate into explicit behavior that is under their, like, they're intending it, right? And then implicit bias is a term that is now talking about it, like unconscious bias is another word for it, and where it's beliefs and attitudes that you may not be aware of, right? And that actually can go oppositional to what you think you believe. So I may not think I'm a racist, but I could have implicit racial biases.
Like looking at other areas of pop culture, like film and television, what are some examples that you've seen of explicit bias that, as someone who's, I think we're all spending a lot more time at home recently. and so we watch a lot of TV perhaps, and there are some shows, I'm not necessarily calling any out, but there are some episodes of some shows that I see now and I'm like, what? Wait, but they were able to say this back then? This seems explicitly biased. But do you all have any examples of maybe anything that didn't seem explicit to you maybe before, or maybe that in culture didn't seem explicit before, but that now for you it's like, oh, this is obviously maybe semi-problematic?
So there's a kids movie that wasn't intentionally to be racist, but it was intentional. It was showing a kind of an explicit bias. It's called Zootopia.
Oh,
and,
yes.
you know, like they were kind of explaining what explicit bias was. Like everyone hated the predators. The predators were like 10% of the population, like Black people. And, you know, everybody had a problem with the predators, and all the prey was the majority, and they were the police, and they were the, you know, the meter maids, and they were the citizens that needed protecting. Yeah. But the whole movie, I don't know. I know it wasn't a racist movie, obviously, but it did a good job in explaining what bias is and how ridiculous it is. Because the end of the movie, like it showed, like actually, there was a prey who was the mastermind behind the whole thing, causing the predators to act the way that everyone was afraid of them, you know? And so I think that was a great movie. Some people had problems with it because some people said that the metaphor was a little bit messed up or a little bit too direct, but I think it did a great job to educate kids on just kind of no one type of person is the same or animal is the same, and everyone should be judged based on their merit and what they've done in the past themselves, and not people that just look like them or act like them, or animals in this case that look like them or act like them.
So, Ajel, you're getting like very close to talking about privilege and privilege's relationship perhaps with explicit bias. There are some people who these biases perhaps may benefit. So I'm curious, for Nancy and Jamie, do you have any thoughts on that relationship between privilege and bias, and perhaps how pop culture kind of informs or influences those two things?
I see it right in front of our faces when it comes to the leader of this free country. Privilege doesn't get any more, blatant than that. I don't think that a Black president or a president of color could nearly get away with a lot of the things that our current president has gotten away with, and that is because of the color of his skin. It would be crazy to me to think that a Black president could get away with not paying taxes. So I think that, white privilege plays a huge role in the advantages that happen for white people. And it's good to see some conversations being had with white people where they acknowledge their privilege, but it is very frustrating when they say that white privilege is not a thing, because it is a thing, and it has been a thing, and it continues to be a thing as long as communities of color are, redlined in districts, and voter suppression keeps happening in mostly communities of color, and a myriad of issues when it comes to how people of color are treated compared to white people. And it is because of that privilege. So it goes far beyond, pop culture and entertainment, but we see it in our politics. We see it, when it comes to job applications. Black and ethnic names don't get the opportunities to even get past HR when it comes to getting hired for positions over white people. So It is a pervasive thing in all areas, and it's a very powerful thing. And I think that is something that is not recognized enough.
So in Hollywood, there has been a history of privilege that is both explicit and implicit biasly driven. So the Hays Code was a code started in the 30s all the way to the 60s, where Hollywood didn't allow for interracial romances to be portrayed on screen. So that meant people of color did not get those roles to be romantic leads, which were so many, most movies, right? And so that was an explicit bias that excluded people of color. And even to this day, we think about, I think this is implicitly biased. It could be considered implicit bias because people will say, well, I think we should greenlight this film or this television show. And it's an all-white cast, right? Over a cast with people of color. Traditionally, Hollywood didn't think that people of color would sell. They didn't think that they wouldn't sell domestically in certain markets, and certainly not internationally. But then we have something like Black Panther totally dispelling that, doing well both domestically and internationally. But then we don't see like lots of copycats of that, right? Crazy Rich Asians, the top rom-com in 10 years. Why aren't there more Crazy Rich Asians? I mean, there's sequels, right, planned for both of these. But why aren't there copycats? You know, why aren't they like, they're leaving money, on the table, because there's a research that just shows that that in fact there's more demand for diverse projects than there are diverse projects, right? So there's audiences that are hungry for it, but Hollywood is not doing it because of the biases that they have towards white projects, because they still believe, and a lot of it because they are white, the creators are white, the studio heads are white, and so they're greenlighting projects that are familiar to them, which is part of implicit bias. It's not racist if I'm just greenlighting things that I think are going to make lots of money, but they're wrong about projects starring people of color that, they think that they don't make money, but in fact, evidence shows that they do.
I have to say, this is the same thing that happens in the toy industry. Same thing. Because I released an episode about the ripple effect of racial bias in the toy industry. But then people were contacting me after listening to this podcast episode, and they were like, oh my God, I've experienced the same thing. I remember getting in trouble for placing black dolls on the top shelves of planograms or at eye level on planograms and being told I have to move them to the bottom level. And if you work in the toy industry, you know that anything below eye level isn't going to sell as well as anything at eye level, just because of accessibility. And then they're forced to move the doll down, and of course the doll doesn't sell as well, and then they just use that as fuel to say, oh, black dolls don't sell. So, and like, it's just crazy because it's so predominantly white and male, or it has been for so long, that those same people, they comment on my pages and they say, you're wrong, black dolls don't sell, this podcast is wrong. And it's so frustrating that those people are still high enough to control what's being released. But there are companies and there are people fighting it, but it's still the majority.
Ajel, these day and age, you're still getting people commenting on your page telling you like black dolls don't sell?
Yeah, 2 months ago.
Crazy. That's crazy.
2 months ago. Like trolling, just complete trolling.
Just straight up. Wow.
Yeah.
Can I just wanted to jump in because I think it's really important with respect to Ajel's comment about the toy industry. It's really important that we see black dolls and that the black dolls are available, because I just remember growing up, I grew up in the 80s, so it was a while ago. but I remember the black dolls that I did get, which was few and far between. They had European features. So I would have black dolls with blue eyes. They would be dark skinned, but they would have blue eyes, and they would have features with, very small, narrow nose, narrow lips, Eurocentric features. And obviously long, straight hair. So that didn't look like me. Those dolls didn't represent me. And as I had mentioned earlier, pop culture, it shapes who we are, and representation shapes who we are, and it shapes who we become. And if we continue to see images of dolls that look of a certain race, which does play into white privilege, which does play into what Nancy was saying about, representation behind the camera as well as in front, like these people that are making these dolls white people and white manufacturers, we've got to have more people that are in all areas of entertainment, of manufacturing, distribution, company, leadership positions, to have us reflected. Because if we don't, then you'll grow up as a child seeing a doll that doesn't look like you and thinking that you're not attractive, and then doing everything in your power to look like that white doll. And
I did it.
Yeah, I did it too,
Yeah.
wearing contact lenses, trying to make my hair straight.
My mom wouldn't let me wear contact lenses because she was like, your hair is already fake. Your nails are fake. She was like, I can't.
Dang,
she
Mom.
was like, no. She was like, nope, not gonna happen.
Good on Mom for that.
She did. But I have to say, I do remember the very first time I took off my weave hair, and I remember hating my afro. I felt horribly ugly. And I don't know. I remember that was the moment where I was like, oh no, there's something wrong here. Like, even if I hate this, I'm gonna have to embrace this, right?
Yeah.
I think that it's clear from what all three of you are saying, it's not about people of color replacing white people. There's room for more people. There's just room for additional, right? Like there's more shelf space. Let's diversify that. So people, you don't have to feel threatened by the fact that privilege is being called out. This is not an attack on you or an attack on any people. This is an invitation, also kind of a demand to see and to recognize that there are others, right? There are others that have also been hustling. There are others who do also deserve representation, So I just kind of wanted to put an underline under that, because it's quite clear that with what each of you are saying, it's not an attack. It's like, let's do better. Let's be more.
Yeah. We could sell more too. You diversify, there's money here.
There's money there. And actually kind of leaning on Nancy for this, but anyone please chime on in. I'm wondering if sometimes, just given the roots of how the people who've often been in the gatekeeping capacity, the people who've had the seats to be able to make the decisions, since they've often looked a certain way, do you think that there's been a discomfort perhaps to even take a risk to explore hiring people maybe who don't look like them or who don't have the same background as them? Does that feed into implicit bias as well?
Yeah, so the creative industries are notoriously known for hiring their friends. It's very informal. And Pew Research shows that whites have over 90% white friends. So they don't even know people of color to hire, because that's their friendship circles. Actually, people of color have much more diverse friendship circles because we have to in order to survive. But for the white elites in Hollywood, they don't, there was one actor that I interviewed, a Latina, and she said that there was, I think it was a higher up studio head who called her and said, do you know any Latinas? Because the only ones that he knew were his help. Right?
Oh, wow.
He didn't even know anybody else because he was in such a kind of elite circle. He called the only Latina he knew to ask her for advice on how to find Latino talent at the time, and Latinx talent. And so I think that it's definitely implicit bias, because if they're not even encountering anybody of color, which is, the roots of it are explicit bias, right, and racism, but over time, because they know no one and they can't hire them, or they have to go, the thing is they have to go outside of their circles, right? And this is the way to remedy the implicit bias, and so they have to be explicit about countering that in order to diversify those circles, to diversify those writers' rooms, on television, to diversify also the fact that Mulan, a movie, was directed and written by whites, and so even though if the talent is all people of color, if the storytellers are not familiar with that culture, it's going to be a problem.
Well, Nancy, I think that what you have brought to the surface is a discussion, a very heated discussion about what sorts of policies are actually necessary to be in place. And if you put in a policy saying that we are actively looking to include people, like for example, I know one of the prominent organizations in the film and television industry has now put some procedures in place to be like, look, you are not going to be able to be nominated in this category, if you do not show that you have at least hired this sort of percentage of people, either behind the scenes or working in front of the camera as well, and people have gotten upset. People have gotten very upset because they feel like, well, you're trying to limit our storytelling. You're trying to take our creative control away. But it sounds like what you're saying, Nancy, is like sometimes that might be necessary because it's just not going to naturally get diverse.
Well, I think what you're saying is that there's a scarcity, or there's the idea of a zero-sum game, right?
Mm-hmm.
But look at how many streaming sites we have now. Every single channel on earth has a streaming site, right? And so there's actually more platforms, more channels, more places. I mean, YouTube, you can anybody can stream anything. And it's not because if we include people of color that somehow that's going to lessen, the chances of white stories to be told, because actually in reality, people of color are still underrepresented, especially in, think about like the Emmys, the Oscars, Parasite, that was a huge win, but for most of the part, it's still Oscars, Emmys, so white, right? I was watching Emmys this season. It was like Schitt's Creek was like, oh my gosh, it dominated like the first hour of the Emmys or something. And I had never seen it. I wasn't interested in that kind of story, so felt completely left out, and I was just waiting for the first person of color to be named at all. And so I think that, I think we're not at a point where people of color are taking over by any stretch of the imagination. And also stories of color are like, there is the market, but also we're dying for new stories, right? We've heard, I'm sorry, Schitt's Creek is kind of like, haven't we heard that story already? I'm not to be down on that show, but it's just an example, right? Where we need new stories, and I think we can go to people of color for those stories.
I love Schitt's Creek. I thought it was great. I'm just saying, but I feel you in terms of there is room for more. There's room for more stories. And finally, I do think that we are getting a chance to see some stories come. They're trickling on out there, but when they do come on out, I do feel as though largely we support, and we meaning maybe a collective of people of color. But for example, I'm thinking about Watchmen. I'm thinking about like how Watchmen like really showed up and showed out at the Emmys this year. I was very excited about that. We got Insecure, and but let's just meditate on one thing that Issa said. It was a couple years ago at the Emmys when they asked her who was she rooting for on the red carpet. Do you remember? So like Ajel, Jamie, Nancy, do y'all remember Issa's response?
She's rooting for everybody black.
Yeah.
She did not say that. No, she didn't.
Yes. It was like a mantra.
She didn't.
I tweet that every year. When I live tweet the Oscars and the Emmys, I tweet that every year.
No, she didn't.
She did.
Oh my god.
She said that on the red carpet.
She's coming from YouTube, right? She's coming from where she had total creative control.
Yes.
Bring that in. Bring that ownership and that power in.
Yes.
But
don't you think that there's two things, like people are afraid of not just they're afraid of including people of color, but also the stories are so different. Like maybe they're worried they won't be as successful, the stories themselves.
Well, I think that there are stories that are being told, right? There's a lot of stories that are being directed by people of color and black filmmakers, writers, actors. They're actually out there. The problem is there's a lot of, it's politics when it comes to the Oscars race and the Emmys race, because there's voting guilds, there's critics guilds, and a lot of those people in those guilds are mostly made up of white people and white men. And then you've got the major trades out there, right? I'm not going to say any names, but you've got the big Hollywood trades that are, boosting up when they talk about the Oscars race, the awards race, they always talk about their favorites. But they don't talk about some of the independent black films that made waves. I also go to the film festivals and I review a lot of films, and films that have made waves in the black film festivals like Urban World, American Black Film Festival, Pan-African Film Festival, and others. You don't see that in the big Hollywood trades. Smaller black publications will probably feature those, but the big Hollywood trades don't. And those are the ones that unfortunately people pay attention to, and the very people that are doing the voting, the people that are a member of the critics guilds, the voting guilds when it comes to Oscars and Golden Globes and all of that, they're paying attention to those trades. I mean, some of these films get campaigned for. Some of these studios will wine and dine and, reach out to these voting members to put their film in front of them to make sure that they vote on their film. So there's a lot of politics involved, which is unfortunate because a lot of independent films that are out there that are being made. So it's not to say that these films aren't being seen or that they don't have a massive reach. They're just not getting in front of the right people that have the power enough to vote on them to where they could be nominated for Best Picture or Best, Outstanding Performing Actor for an Emmy or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of the game with Hollywood.
Jamie, and I know that Nancy wasn't necessarily speaking directly about this, but I think that you and Nancy collectively have kind of hit on something that it's close to me, which is this idea that, yes, it's awesome that we had Black Panther. Amazing that we have Black Panther. Amazing that we have Crazy Rich Asians. But there's this responsibility almost that it seems that if we're going to make a film that features people of color prominently, that film better do well. That film better be the biggest film ever.
Yeah.
That film better.
Yes.
Or else we might not make another in a minute. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So it's almost as though there should be the opportunity for films of color to not have to be massive successes.
Yeah.
There are films that don't feature people of color that are not massive successes, and yet those people still get hired again.
We can't be mediocre, and that's another part of white privilege. Black people and people of color, we cannot be mediocre. White people can be mediocre and hold high positions of power.
Yeah, so the whole idea that I think for Fresh Off the Boat, when that was like the first family sitcom that had happened in 20 some years since All American Girl with Margaret Cho back in the 90s, that we were all watching so worried because literally they canceled All American Girl because there wasn't enough, or there wasn't enough support. So we had what I think it was like Jenny Yang talked about representational sweats, like sweats where we're watching and we're like sweating because we're just so worried because it's all on this show. If this show doesn't do well, it'll be another 2 decades and another generation lost with no Asian representation. So I think we felt that way with Crazy Rich Asians as well, and we're gonna feel that way with Shang-Chi, coming out with Marvel. So with Mulan, there was that concern too. It was like, if we say anything bad, then maybe Disney won't make another movie about Asians, So it's a lot of pressure, and it's because there is just so few representations. There's still this unless you make huge box office bank, we're not gonna do another Asian project.
That's so much responsibility on a culture and I don't think that's fair. It's just not fair. But I am curious, as a sidebar, I'm very familiar with Black Twitter. Jamie, I know you're super familiar with Black Twitter as well. But is there an Asian Twitter, Nancy? How do y'all collectively say we all better get out and make sure that we support these projects, or else we might not get another one?
There is an Asian Twitter, and there's a thing called Gold Open, which actually has cooperated also with the Black community on openings, on trying to get as many people in the theater for these movies so that we don't have to worry about that. And also to show that there is an Asian American audience out there, right? Because I think with Crazy Rich Asians opening weekend, it was over 30, it was a very high percentage of Asian American audiences coming out. And we were told to go more than once, multiple times, multiple weekends, because again, we may not get another if we don't support this project. So it felt like a movement. It really did. It was like a pop culture movement for representation.
I mean, this is there's even just a privilege in being able to take something for granted that we don't have, right? It's you don't even have the privilege to be I'm not in the mood to go see the Tiana movie, the Disney movie. It's man, it's crazy.
No, right? We better show up.
I know. I don't know if I'm a fan of all these movies, but I know.
Right.
I gotta go.
I'm a fan of having this movie.
Yes.
I don't know if I like
Yes,
the movie itself.
Right.
That's right. I'm a fan for its existence.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Ajel, you hit on something that I think is probably a dichotomy, a struggle that perhaps some Black writers have, especially at some of these publications that Jamie didn't call out but alluded to. But is that, as a writer of color, when you're sent to review something, and you're supposed to be sharing, like your thoughts and looking at it through a critical lens, like I wonder if sometimes you can feel a little reluctant to say how you truly feel because you're like, we need to present a united front.
I bet, yeah.
Yeah. Have you run into that, Jamie?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
Oh,
I
wow.
mean, there's some TV shows and films that I've elected not to review in support of making sure that film doesn't, because a lot of the times, especially with my publication, people are like, we really look to your publication to tell us the truth and to let us know if this movie sucks, we're not going to see it. And I don't want people to do that. I don't want people to go off of my opinion and not watch a film because obviously it's very subjective.
Wow.
And you might like the film and obviously, I'm not always right. So yeah, I will choose sometimes not to review a film by a Black creator if I don't like it. Again, won't mention names, but there's a TV series that's got a huge Black fandom right now. Not a fan of it, and I chose not to review it. So it's a weird touch and go thing with me, but one thing is for certain, if there is a film that I feel very passionate that I just don't like, and if it is by a Black creator, I will be very honest about it. But yeah, there are times where I'm just like, you know what, I'm gonna give this a pass and just not review it and keep my opinion silent. Yeah.
We're gonna talk about another pop culture property that's been celebrated as presenting Asian culture in a positive way. But in the live action version of this, there were perhaps some issues. I'm talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender. So in the live action version, some would say that they westernized the characters by casting non-Asian actors. I think that's very fair for us to say. Why is this practice harmful?
Well, so it's actually a historical thing in Hollywood, right? There's actually been multiple white actors who have won Oscars for playing Asians. That's how historical and how even lauded this practice is.
Ridiculous.
And the idea is that people are not going to come out and see Asians play themselves, right? I mean, it seems really racist now, but then yes, we have Avatar, which is not that long ago. We have Scarlett Johansson doing Ghost in the Shell, and so it's a problem because talk about authenticity, right? You're not even able to see Asian actors embody Asian characters, but it also feeds into that implicit and really explicit bias that only white actors matter on screen, or that people only want to see that because that's the only choice, even for the very few characters of color, right? I'm already talking about I'm dying here because I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to support every Asian film because there's just so few. And when you have something like Avatar, which is a beloved franchise, and to have it embodied by white actors who are, these are indigenous and Chinese characters that actually in the cartoon were very authentic. They even used Chinese language. And so to have white actors portray that, it's such a disappointment.
I was disappointed. I was like, what the hell is this? I was.
Tragic. It's just tragic. And I don't know what it is about doing an adaptation of animation and wanting to cast white actors, because they did the same thing with Death Note. And that was an anime. And they casted a white actor. And I'm just like, but they did race bend a Black actor in that as well. Lakeith Stanfield was in the film. So I don't know why that's something that is a consistent thing. And you see that mostly in the in Asian properties, in anime, and it's really bothersome. It's tragic. It's sad. The fact that it's still happening even today, like, obviously decades ago, that was the thing. I mean, there was a lot of problems when it came to race and casting, but the fact that it's still happening right now, it just goes to show that there's obviously still a lot of work to do, and there are people that are in these positions of power that are not sensitive to the needs of people of color. So.
And the problem also is that Asian culture is seen as a costume or seen as cosplay or something that you can just like take on. Like it's like we're just background, or we're not seen as actually subjects. We're seen as objects. I mean, how many geisha costumes can we have out there, right?
Yeah.
And also wearing like martial arts. I mean, it's totally fine to have cosplay and to be excited about something, but then it's always Asian stuff, it's always Asian stuff. And so it's like Doctor Strange or something where, it's like the white savior. It's like, and Iron Fist, right? Where like some white dude can go to Asia for like a second and then become the biggest, best martial artist ever, right?
The Last Samurai.
The Last Samurai, right? Every weekend we go and take some yoga or something and become a guru. I mean, these are the narratives that have, I think Kung Fu, the series, right? Back in the 70s, right? It's just this idea that anybody can be a martial artist because it's so easy like that. So
yeah. And that breaks my heart when you mention Kung Fu the series, because Bruce Lee got passed up for that role over Keith Carradine. So it's just like Bruce Lee, this epic, iconic figure in cinema. We could have had him in that role and he got passed up. So whenever I hear and read about the story of that, it's just so heartbreaking to me.
I just talked to Bruce Lee's daughter, Shannon Lee, about this, and she said that they claimed that his English wasn't good.
Oh my gosh.
And Bruce Lee's English is fantastic. He actually went out of his way to master grammar and handwriting and everything because he wanted to, establish himself as an American. He was born in Seattle, moved back to Hong Kong, but he was a master of philosophy and words. He was just great, and so the kind of idea, whatever excuse they're going to give to not cast an Asian, they're going to give it.
I just wish the excuse was almost the opposite. Like it was like, if we can't find enough Asians that can speak English to the level that we want them to for this film, why isn't the decision to maybe this needs to be a subtitled film because it needs to have Asians? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It needs to be authentic more than it needs to be in English.
Well, because that's inconvenient, Ajel.
Right.
It's just inconvenient.
I'm not gonna lie. I was at one point, I remember going to the movie theater and my friend was like, "Oh, this movie's awesome. We have to go see it." And I was young. And then it started and I was like, "Are we about to read subtitles?" And then I was like, "You didn't tell me I had to read subtitles." Today, it's my favorite movie, like Pan's Labyrinth. To this day, I was like blown away. I was like, screw all of my preconceived notions. I was wrong. I will read for the rest of my life. This was fantastic. Like, I don't know.
And look, for those who might be watching this that maybe have not jumped into any film with subtitles yet or a television show with subtitles, like, it's okay. Like, dip your toe in. If you feel like it's too much work after 5 or 10 minutes, it's okay. Like, rest your eyes, then try again. But like, there's just so much that we block ourselves from when we don't open ourselves up to things that are unfamiliar for us, like right on the other side of inconvenience. Often it's like a gold mine of just knowledge and of joy. So like Studio Ghibli movies, right? On HBO Max, I'm watching them, and you can watch it with English, or you can watch it in the original Japanese with subtitles. And I don't speak Japanese, so I mean, I'm watching it and I don't know what they're saying, but I choose to have it in the original voices and the original intention because I want that. So well, look, we've mentioned Studio Ghibli, we've mentioned Pan's Labyrinth. What are some other moments in pop culture, some other pieces of pop culture you think that really do emphasize inclusivity, and maybe they're not so overt, but what are just some examples that you can remember of inclusivity in pop culture that makes you feel proud and that makes you feel hopeful?
Well, I think what Issa Rae has done with Insecure is amazing. And I've been following her career since she did The Misadventures of Awkward Black Girl, because her character was me. And she was obviously awkward, and she was a bit socially inept at times, and she carried kind of that character into Insecure. So, and also I just find it so remarkable what she's done with her career and just taking full ownership over, being the person that's behind the camera with, writing and producing, and obviously having mostly a Black writer's room. So that kind of inclusivity is important, and that's inspiring to me to see that someone who's worked so hard from working in the web space, in the YouTube space, and just doing those type of series, to now having her own series. I believe it got like 7 or 8 nominations for Emmys.
Huge.
And she's just had this remarkable career, and now she's parlaying into the feature films and getting some work there. So it's just great to see that, and here she is, this young Black woman that is inspiring to all women, I think, but definitely to me, she's someone that is the epitome of what inclusivity is in pop culture.
By the way, have you had a chance to speak with Issa yet?
I did. I met with her at Comic-Con a few years ago, and I told her, I was like, you're partly the reason why I created Black Girl Nerds, because your show, your series was very inspiring to me. So it definitely gave me the confidence to be like, yeah, there should be a space for Black women that self-identify as nerds and maybe consider themselves awkward at times. So yeah, I did have a chance to tell that to her, and she was like, oh, well, thank you so much. And so yeah, it was great to have that moment with her.
Wonderful. Nancy, what about you? Is there something that gives you hope within pop culture where you're like, okay, we're headed in the right direction?
So I have been a fan of Star Trek since I was little, and it's like not. I realize like it's not the most. I mean, it's really popular, but it's not the most popular fandom. But it always makes me happy and hopeful about a kind of more diverse, inclusive, utopian future. And the new season of Star Trek Discovery just dropped, and that first episode was like all Black and brown. I was amazed, it was like an entire episode, and it was it was a kind of dystopic beginning, but it ended on it was very corny, we have to have hope, we have to be true believers, but I kind of need that right now in my life. I need hope. I need a belief that sometime in the future, when we're all in spacesuits, that there's gonna be people that look like me, that look like my friends who are diverse, and it's not gonna be this racist hierarchy and sexist hierarchy, but it's everyone's gonna have a chance to be captain of a starship, right?
Shoot, speak on it. Yes.
Yes.
No, that's it's funny. Sometimes in pop culture, things that are hopeful, things that are uplifting can kind of, get a side eye. People are like, oh, that's corny. But look, sometimes we need that. Can we just, especially right now, look, the real world is crazy enough, is wild enough. Can we get some hope up in here?
Yes.
So Ajel, and this can even be something, since you are such a toy pro, probably everything that's happening within merchandising. You probably know about toys that are being made that we as the general public might not even see until 2022. What's giving you hope?
Yeah. Well, what's really exciting is hearing that retailers are actually asking the Black manufacturers that currently supply their stores, they're actually asking them, do you know any other Black manufacturers that we could partner with? So that's exciting to hear. And I'm hearing them Also giving out directives saying like, you need to refresh your packaging to reflect more diverse families. They're telling toy companies that they have to do that. I mean, it's starting .com, but eventually it'll get into retail.
Wow.
And also like people are, forming groups like Black Women in Toys is a new group that's forming. And then there are initiatives that small PR companies are making to be inclusive of Black influencers on Instagram that, most of them have fewer followers than normally you would expect of influencers, but we know there's a reason behind that. It all is part of the same cycle, but they're taking them under their wing and they're saying, we're gonna give you a shot. We're gonna help you grow your audience and at the same time have you promote our clients' products. So they're bringing Black people into the fold, and I love that. That's really exciting.
By the way, it fills me with joy, the fact that each of you has such a different lane in terms of expertise, and then yet somehow it all converges into this amalgam of hope, of knowledge, and more so though, like of impact and influence. So for all of our viewers who are at home watching this right now, getting fired up, trying to think like, how can they help to progress the narrative, to really continue to diversify the field of race and pop culture, can each of you give us some sort of tip, something that we could do to grow?
Yeah, so if you're in the toy industry or you want to be in the toy industry, when you see implicit bias and people are making like comments and suggestions for product lines that just seem a little bit out of touch, just say something instead of I've been there where I haven't said anything, number one. And then number two, if you have an idea for a doll line or something that's culturally specific and diverse, do it. There are so many people now that are doing ideas that I had 10 years ago, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I should have gone with it. Even if I was taking like small little steps, the world needs it and is so happy it's here now. And if you have an idea, I want you to run with it because you're gonna thank yourself later. The world needs it. We need the diversity. We need the different ideas. And I just feel if you have a toy concept, develop it, sketch it out, and then little by little, the more you learn, the more you grow, like develop it. Come to me if you need help and you don't know where to start, but like try.
And how can they come to you?
Right. Oh yeah. Come to me. thetoycoach.com. That's my website. You can get my email info or just learn from my podcast, Making It in the Toy Industry. Listen to episode 1 through like 5. It's pretty much how do you develop your idea and how do you start manufacturing it. So
I would just say for me, support Black media. There's not a lot of us out here. And those of us that are still here, even in a pandemic-filled world, we need your support now more than ever. I work to highlight voices on my site that are independent voices. We obviously do report on the popular things that are in the pop culture space, and we talk about the Marvels and the Warner Brothers and the Sony films of the world. But we do focus on independent films, independent writers of different books, comic book creators, people in the gaming field. And that's important because a lot of those folks, they don't have the opportunity to even have a space to have their stories told. So, support Black media that are using themselves as a conduit to amplify marginalized voices and people of color that are actually creating content, because we continue to hear this narrative that there's not enough content out there that feature Black entertainers or Black filmmakers or Black authors, and that's just not true. It's just that we're not getting the representation because some of the bigger guys that are louder and have a larger audience, they just erase those people by not featuring them. So instead, rather retweeting those articles and sharing those articles, support the Black publications that are actually doing the work and the grassroots work to amplify voices that you don't always see on your radar. It's great to be in a world also where we have these digital spaces where we can create them and we don't have to ask for a seat at the table anymore. We can basically create our own table, and we can build and have other people come to our table and build and create empires of our own. So don't feel that that's something you can't do, because you can do it. With digital, it's easier now than ever, but the support is always going to be needed. So yeah, that's kind of my plea to the world right there.
Yeah, we can all be carpenters and fashion these tables now. Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
So Nancy, take us home. But what can we be doing?
So in terms of popular culture, it's actually really simple. Just buy stuff. Buy tickets to opening weekends, to the kinds of inclusive content you want to see more of. I mean, sometimes it's like, I gotta go see the Asian film because I need to see more of it. And that's okay, because I feel like we're still just, starting to get ourselves on the map. But also I also support all content of color and inclusive media. I like to think of ourselves as being, in solidarity with other content. I mean, I grew up, and I know that the Cosby Show has issues with Bill Cosby and everything, but that was my show growing up. I didn't have any Asians on TV to look at, and I felt more akin to those Cosby kids than anybody else.
Wow.
And so
Same.
they were my family, and so because I could tell that they were other, right? They were other, but they were successful, and they were happy, and they were also together, and they felt very much like a traditional family, which mine was. And so I think that we can support one another in terms of other groups of color that we know are underrepresented. I go to film festivals that are not just Asian American, and when I go to Sundance, I see films. I saw what was it, the Miss Juneteenth, and I love the kind of indie films with voices that are underrepresented, because those are the stories that I'm interested in, and that's just my taste, and I think like what we've been talking about, if you try the subtitle film, you try the film that's not about the community that you grew up with, you're going to find that there are so many more things that you haven't thought about that'll expand your lived experience. And being part of a multicultural country, we need those experiences. We need to understand one another better, right? Mm-hmm. I like white working class projects as well. I love things that focus on, like rural communities. I just like to see stories of people that I feel like those stories are not being told, because we need to understand each other, because we're such a polarized society, and we need that to create the utopia that Star Trek talks about. We need to actually interact with people, right? Not just on screen, but pop culture, but maybe understanding people through their own stories. That makes us more willing to actually interact with people that we don't interact with in real life. So we need that. So I'm all for creating a more utopian society through consumption of better culture, of more diverse culture, and that's what we're here talking about today.
As we've explored throughout this episode, pop culture is a complete reflection of our society, so there's still a lot of work to be done. And in the rest of this series, more panelists will join us as we dive even further into the intersection of pop culture and race by tackling topics like identity in pop culture, appreciation and appropriation, and close out with the future of pop culture. I want to thank you for watching us, and of course our insightful guests for being here to continue this dialogue. I'm your host Albert Lawrence for BL Perspectives, and I will see you in time for episode 2.